Hi, thank you for coming, Venerable. I have a question is, lately I've been meditating at night, like maybe for 1 hour or so. But I realized I've been waking up earlier, so I don't know whether is it due to the meditation or is it because I'm suffering from some sleep disorder. So I'm just wondering whether meditation can actually replace certain number of hours of sleep.
Sorry, I didn't really answer the question.
I'll repeat her question. She has been recently been meditating at night.
Yes.
Before she goes to bed, at an hour each time, and she found that she has been waking up earlier, much earlier than she wanted to. So she's wondering if actually meditation cuts down her sleeping hours. Or is it her sleeping disorder that she didn't have sufficient sleep?
Well, I think if, what can I say? But if you find that meditating before sleep then gives you a deep and restful sleep, so that then you can easily wake up earlier, then that's wonderful, because then you can get up and meditate some more. Isn't it? I mean, if you wake up feeling still very sleepy and drowsy, then it means you're not getting enough sleep. But if you wake up earlier and your mind is feeling quite rested, then that is a wonderful opportunity to use the extra time for doing some more meditation, isn't it? To start the day. It's very good to start the day with some, meditation. It sets the tone for the day, right? So apart from going to meditate before you sleep, it would be good, even if you didn't give it an hour, even, half an hour or 20 minutes of sitting and setting up your aspirations and doing some practice before the whole day starts. It's perfect. So be happy.
Next.
Hello. Thank you very much for spending the time with us. I do have a couple of questions. Maybe I'll start with the first one. I was always quite curious because I've read that you read a book about Buddhism at the beginning, and that's what made you decide to continue with the tradition. So I don't quite know if it's been stated anywhere at all, but would you mind sharing what book that was and whether you ever completed it? Because I think the story goes that you read half of the book and then it filled you with so much conviction that you decided to go down this path.
Yeah, it was a book which I think is now very much out of print. It was called The Mind Unshaken. And I just like the title. I was working in a library at the time, and on a Saturday afternoon before we were closing up and I was about to go on my travels, somebody brought in the book. And I just liked the title, The Mind Unshaken. It was by someone called John Walters. He was a journalist who worked in Thailand. So the book was perfect for, start-up Buddhist, Four Noble Truths, karma and rebirth, and the precepts and basic meditation, breath meditation. Very, 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 very simple. But because he was a journalist, he wrote in a very approachable style. It wasn't dry. It was quite engaging. And the Four Noble Truths, he started with the Four Noble Truths. And I mean, as I read it, I just felt I had always known this, but I hadn't known that there was actually a path. What I was so grateful to the Buddha was that he gave a path, the Eightfold Path, right? I was just so grateful that he didn't say, oh, this is what you can get, and this is what you can achieve, but he showed step by step body, speech, and mind how to walk the path. And I was just so deeply grateful that he laid it out so clearly. And all we had to do was walk the path. I mean, that's the other side of it. But at least he gave a path to walk on. And so that's why when I just read half the book, I recognized I already knew this, but I hadn't known that there was, I had always thought Buddhism was too, I didn't know anything about it, but I thought it would be too difficult, too dry, too, you know, not something I could get into. So when I read the book, I realized how actually accessible Buddhism is and how practical and how, you know, it was so clear and did not, and also to be truthful, it was non-theistic. And since I didn't believe in the idea of a kind of creator God up there pulling the strings and then judging us at the end, and I had always believed in rebirth and karma without it being known about much in those days. So it was like coming home. And that was just it. I mean, as soon as I started reading it, I thought, oh, this is it. This is where I belong. So, yes. But I think now that book, although it would have been a very nice book to give to somebody, right? If people always ask, what book can we give to somebody to, you know, to give them an idea of what Buddhism is about? Most books are too technical, or they go into too much detail for a beginner. And that was a perfect book for beginners. But unfortunately, as far as I know, it's out of print long time ago. I mean, this was back in the early 60s. So, yeah. Then? Of what?
Holding lightly. Holding lightly.
Lightly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And compassion, the idea of extending empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry about that.
Yeah, go on.
Yes, so I've always found it much easier to be building capacity. So in the sense of being able to see things from a distance. But it's a lot harder to build compassion through meditation, at least in my own personal practice. So I was wondering if it is possible to build both at once, or did you find that one came before the other, that you first had to build capacity before building compassion?
Well, I mean, you know, different people approach the idea of compassion is just the recognition that, as the Buddha said, we all would rather be happy than be miserable, right? I mean, it's based on whoever we are and wherever we are. Basically, I would rather feel okay than not feel okay, right? And as the Buddha said, to each one, his own self is most dear. In other words, we cherish ourselves the most. So just as I would rather be okay and feel fine than be miserable and suffer. So everybody, not just human beings, but, you know, animals, birds, fish, beings seen and beings unseen, all of them would rather feel okay than not feel okay. But unfortunately, circumstances being as they are, and this being samsara, many people are not okay, even though they would like to be. And so recognizing how I really would rather be happy than be miserable, seeing it everywhere. You know, you can sit on a bus or a train or a plane or walk down the street or be caught in a traffic jam and recognize that every single being, all the human beings sitting there have problems. Almost everybody has a problem, has a difficulty, family, workplace, health, relationships, politics, economics, the world situation, the anxiety, watching your children grow up and not knowing what they're going to be doing, and you know, your personal relationships and your interpersonal relationships. Everybody has something that very, very few people are radiantly happy and filled with inner joy. There's always something. And so then from that you feel that empathy, right? That just as oneself has problems and would like to be free from the problems, all these beings have problems and would like to be free from the problems. And so that just on that very basic level, we can recognize how interconnected we are with all these other beings. And may they be well and happy. You know, really, wouldn't it be lovely if they should be well and happy? That's the idea. You know, I mean, apart from the Tibetan emphasis on how we are all interconnected with all these beings through many lifetimes and they've all been our mother. And just as we would like our mother to be well in this lifetime, so we have forgotten how we were so intimately connected with all these beings that we meet now, but we don't remember anymore. But just as we would like in this lifetime our mother to be happy, likewise, all these beings who have been like our mother, may they all be well and happy. The Buddha was very practical, because when he taught the Brahma Viharas, when he taught loving kindness and compassion and rejoicing in goodness and equanimity, he said, we start with ourselves. And this is very important, that first we make friends with ourselves, right? Because sometimes people, you know, put a lot of emphasis into trying to be compassionate and kind to others, but they forget themselves. And then, you know, especially a lot of social workers and others who are doing so much to help others, they are putting out all this energy outside, but they're not drawing inside to themselves first. So it's like they're breathing out, breathing out, breathing out, but they're never breathing in. So then you get asphyxiated, right? Because you're putting all that energy out, but you're never refilling. It's like this, you know. If I keep, you know, giving it out and out and out, soon it will be empty unless we continually refill. So the Buddha was very, very pragmatic, you might say. And he said, right, first you start by filling up. So we make friends with ourselves. And we have compassion also towards ourselves. We wish that we may be happy and free from suffering. And genuinely, since I have to travel everywhere with ourselves, we can't put ourselves away, we might as well make a good friend of ourselves that we can travel with, right, through samsara. Make friends, right? Forgive ourselves, be kind to ourselves. Rejoice in our goodness, not just think of all our faults. And then from that, it's easy to think of people that we love, people we care for, our family, our good friends, you know, wishing them to be happy. How lovely it would be. Oh, really, all it is how lovely it would be if they were happy and free from suffering. Wouldn't that be nice? And then people that we never really think about, people we pass, you know, in the street, or the bus driver, or the, you know, postman. Do they have postmen anymore? But anyway, people that you meet every day and your work colleagues, and you never really thought whether they're happy or miserable. And thinking they're just like me, they would rather be okay and not suffer. And then, of course, people that we have problems with, that we, don't like very much, who cause us trouble and have caused us trouble in the past or in the present, then may they be well and happy. May they be free from suffering. Why not? And then all beings, every single being we meet, would rather be feeling okay than not feeling okay. And that's all we need to do with compassion, is to open up our heart to recognize that all beings want to feel good and don't want to suffer. So then just pragmatically, when you meet somebody, just feel that for them, that kindness of wishing them to be well and happy and free from suffering. I mean, it's a very, in the ultimate level of the mind, we experience our interconnection with all beings. Our ordinary level of dualistic mind separates us from others. There's me, and then there's everyone else out there who is not me. And we don't recognize how, at a very deep, basic level, we are all very deeply interconnected. And therefore, my happiness is the happiness of others. Others' suffering is my suffering. But be kind. I mean, whether or not we attain Buddhahood in one lifetime is very unlikely, but we can all try to be more kind and more empathetic towards others' happiness and suffering. That we can all do. And if we can't manage that, then what are we talking about, right?
Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing. I just had a question about, I guess, the experience of meditation. And sometimes when I meditate, I sort of look at myself as if I'm a character in a video game, or sort of like not me, basically, like looking at me as if I'm a third party character, and sort of, and I guess thinking about it in terms of like, this is sort of dissociating, and it's sort of like, I guess, going back to, I guess, some Buddhist teachings about, the ego not being important and things like that. And that sort of scares me a little bit, that because then the train of thought becomes whatever actions or whatever actions and consequences do not matter. And then you sort of continue along that thread. And it sort of, I guess, ties into this, maybe the absolute truth where, like, nothing, there's no, we're free of concept, and I'm free of me as an individual, and I guess that feels a little like scary to me, because the logical conclusion to that is, then our lives are not particularly worth, and nothing we do is particularly worth anything, if that is the end state. So I was wondering, how do we sort of rationalize that? Because it's like, we also want to be compassionate. We want to believe that everyone's interconnected.
Yeah. Yes, well, that is actually something of a danger, because on the one hand, Buddhism says that there is no, our whole idea of grasping at an ego is a fiction, right? And sometimes during meditation, you get that feeling, I'm not this self that I thought I was this self. And so if one is not careful, especially with all the talk about emptiness and so forth, it can lead to a very nihilistic viewpoint where, all right, I don't exist and nothing really has any value, and so forth. But that is an extreme, right? So on the one hand, you have the extreme of thinking, oh, I am exactly who I think I am, and all my memories and all my opinions and all my viewpoints and all my sense of me is real and true. And on the other hand, you have the extreme of thinking, none of this is real. I don't exist. I'm not, this whole thing is just empty phenomena without any meaning, and everything I do has no meaning, and there is no goodness or evil. It's all just like a phantom. And that's the other extreme of thinking nothing has meaning, instead of thinking everything is about me, right? So I would be careful of that, because that is also, what we're trying to do is, if you think of the sense of ego as being like something which, the small sense of self, which we all carry with us, is covering up a much vaster level of consciousness. It's the opposite of nothing. It's on one level everything, because it's what interconnects us with all beings, right? This is the point. It's like you shift the consciousness to something so much vaster than anything which our conceptual thinking mind can imagine. But it's like waking up. You suddenly you realize that normally we are sleepwalking, right? It's like if you're asleep, normally you dream, and then you wake up and you think, oh, that was just a dream, right? Now I'm awake. But from the point of view of ultimate level of consciousness, we're still asleep, right? And this is why Buddha means to wake up, right? So the correct effect of getting through the ego is to wake up to sorry, I'm losing my voice. Is to wake up to a level which is very expensive and joyful. Very filled with what they call great bliss. Just this tremendous release from the cage of our ego into this open, spacious interconnection and very clear, luminous awareness with tremendous joy and tremendous compassion just spontaneously arising. That's what you should be getting, right? So this nihilistic, cold blankness is not good, right? And it's not truth. So don't worry about it. But don't think that that's telling you how things really are, because it's not, okay? So I would be very careful what kind of meditation you're doing that brings on that kind of mind, right? We do see that this whole idea of our grasping at a self as an ego is a delusion, but that opens up into something so much vaster. It doesn't lead us into a state of sterility and coldness. So maybe do lots of loving kindness meditation or something to warm up, because your heart should open up, right? It shouldn't become nihilistic, as I say. I mean, nihilism is the opposite of our grasping at thinking everything is me and mine. But the dropping of the me and mine should open you up into a so much more fulfilling level of consciousness, really rich beyond belief, not something cold and sterile. Do you understand? Does what I'm saying make sense? You should be filled, I mean, the ultimate nature of the mind is the clarity, the luminosity of the mind, but along with it, tremendous love and compassion. I mean, that's our true nature, right? So that's what we've got to get back to, is this inner joy and tremendously open spaciousness of the mind. A tremendous clarity of insight, which at the same time gives rise to great compassion. Because compassion is not just the fact that we are suffering on a mundane level, but that we all have this, our ultimate nature is so fantastic beyond thought, and we don't know it. Right? This is the problem. That we all have innate Buddha nature and we don't see it. And so we identify with our little ego and we don't recognize our true nature. But our true nature is beautiful, that's the thing. I mean, I was very important to realize what our true nature is really. There is this true story, which you may already know because you're in Singapore. In Thailand, there was this monastery, this temple, and in the temple grounds, there was this large clay Buddha. And it wasn't a particularly beautiful Buddha, but it was a Buddha, so it was there in the garden, made of clay. And it was very old. It had been there for hundreds of years. And then one time the clay, because it was very old and dried out, it split. And then when people looked in the split, there was something shining. And so then they began to clear away the clay, and they realized it was actually a solid gold Buddha. And they figured that it was a gold Buddha, which it was during the time of the Burmese invasions. And so the monks had been afraid that the Burmese would carry their gold Buddha back to Burma. So they had covered it with clay. And then presumably the monks left or they were killed. And so nobody knew that this clay Buddha was actually a golden Buddha. And so through all the centuries, they had just thought it was nothing. It was just a rather plain, ugly clay Buddha. And all the time it was gold, solid gold. And the gold was never spoilt by the fact that for so many years it was considered to be clay, right? It was always just waiting for the clay to be removed, and there was the gold. And so that's like us. You know, we all have this great inner Buddha potential. It's just there, waiting. It just means that the mind is luminous and clear and knowing. It's nothing, you know, it is a tremendous experience of being our interconnection, but it's just the knowing quality of the mind, which normally we never actually recognize. So it's just recognizing what is already there. And that brings tremendous sense of liberation, of letting go, and with it, great joy. So that's what you have to look for, right? And that's the opposite of being, thinking that nothing is worth, everything is meaningless. On the contrary, everything then becomes filled with meaning. And we realize our genuine potential, you know? I mean, like the clouds part and there's the sky. And then the clouds come back again. But now you know there's sky, right? So I would adjust your meditation so that you begin to interconnect with the inner joy in your heart rather than the sterility. I don't know what kind of meditation you're doing, but it doesn't sound like it's leading to a good place. Hmm?
Come and join anapanasati meditation.
it's very important to have a meditation which also connects with your heart, right? Because the heart chakra is what needs to be activated. Otherwise, if it just stays in the brain, then it can lead to this sense of distance, but not in a healing way. You know, we're trying to heal and to fill up our inner distance, so that we connect with our true nature, and that connects us with all other beings and their true nature too.
Jetsunma, you've been practicing for many years. Okay, I said you've been practicing for many years. Are there any views that perhaps in your initial years you were holding closely, and after some time in your practice you decide that perhaps I shouldn't hold so dearly to those views? It could be a Buddhist view, it could be a doctrine, it could be a person. But there's something that you realize it's not worth holding on to those views?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I think actually, on the whole, I have come to appreciate more and more how extraordinarily true the Buddha Dhamma is, you know. When I first came to the Buddha Dhamma in England, then at that time, this was in the early 1960s, so Buddhism was hardly known at that time. It was before the hippie period, right? And so there really was just a kind of middle-class, middle-aged type of entertainment. It was hardly, I mean, really there was not much going on in the Buddhist world in London in those days. But the books I read were mostly dealing with, you know, very basic Buddhism, too basic almost. And I loved everything about the Buddha Dhamma. What I have to admit that what I didn't like were the arahats. And I had a very difficult time with the arahats. I loved the Buddha. I would lie in bed and cry tears of devotion thinking of the Buddha. But I didn't like those arahats. They sounded very cold. I mean, unfair, I like the arahats now. But in those days, I worried about it. I thought, well, this path is leading you to being an arahat, and I don't want to be an arahat. I want to be a Buddha. And I remember, I mean, now when I look back, but at the time, I really worried about this. I thought, if you don't like carrots, you don't make a carrot cake. And it was only some time later that I read about bodhisattvas and the importance of compassion as the path. And I just was so relieved at that time that, there was this path which led towards greater compassion for all beings rather than rejecting them almost, like desiring to become liberated without wanting to take all other beings along with you, to be liberated in order to liberate. As soon as I heard about that, then I felt this tremendous affinity. Yes, that was what was missing, was the motivation for wanting to be liberated, which was not about wanting to be of benefit to all beings. So that changed my views, I mean, but that was very early on. And in general, I would say that, no, I think really, you know, when you meet, especially with like, you know, of course I belong to Tibetan Buddhism, so I'm talking from that angle, but when I went to India and Nepal back in the mid-60s, there were many great masters who had just come from Tibet. And so they had been trained in Tibet. They had spent, many of them 15, 20 years in retreat. They were really, really, you would meet these great masters, and they didn't know English, we didn't know Tibetan. It didn't matter at all. Language had nothing to do with it. There was the fruition of the path sitting there, saying, have a cup of tea. It was an extraordinary thing, and nowadays that almost, you could say that's not true anymore because they've all died. And the new incarnations don't get the kind of training that those masters got. But they showed the truth of the path, that if you really practiced wholeheartedly, this was the result. And it was very simple. They weren't doing anything. They weren't radiating lights or they weren't trying to say anything to impress you, since we didn't have a common language anyway. They were just sitting there, drinking their cup of tea. But there was just that knowing, this is the fruit of the path. It is possible. And I'm always very grateful that I was there at that time when these great masters came. And, they showed the truth of the practice. But on the whole, I think, really, there are many, many different paths, and I'm not saying Buddhism is the only path, or that Buddhists have a copyright on ultimate reality. Any genuine spiritual path will take you there if you practice with sincerity. But the Buddha Dhamma is very clear. It's extraordinarily, if you practice, you can see the truth of what has been put down. And that's what I really admire about the Buddha Dhamma above all else. And that it takes you step by step by step. And it can be so simple. And it can be so complicated. And everything in between. And some people like complications. And that, engages them. And some people like things very, very simple. Some people like things in between. But all of it is how things really are. That's what the Buddha always wanted, that we should see things how they really are. And that all of it is pointing in that direction, in the direction of liberation of the heart-mind. And I'm very grateful to the Buddha. Now it's been many years, but I'm still very, very grateful to the Buddha. Thank you, Buddha. Thank you, Buddha.
Especially within Vajrayana, devotion is such an important aspect on the path. Could you share with us your devotion?
Well, I was very fortunate. In India now, I spend most of my afternoons meeting with people. And one of the main questions which people come up with is, okay, they've done a 10-day beginner's course in Dharamshala, and yeah, wow, this sounds really great. And so now, how do I find a Lama? And everybody is looking for their teacher. And it's like you can't pull it like a rabbit out of a hat, oh, here's a Lama, you go to him. Because, one thing is that different Lamas suit different people, and also where nowadays to find a teacher, because the really well-known teachers have hundreds of students, and it's very difficult. People want a one-on-one connection with their teacher, But actually, that's very, very difficult nowadays to find. So I was very, very fortunate. I had really very good karma that when, I mean, from an early childhood, when I was very, very young, although I had a very happy childhood, and I mean, nothing wrong with my childhood and my family, but I always knew I didn't belong there and that I had to leave. And so when I was a teenager, I was already working about emigrating, maybe to New Zealand or something. Then I became Buddhist when I was 18, and then I knew I had to go to India. And I was thinking about it the other day that I never questioned that I would find my teacher in India. I mean, I just knew that's where I had to go. So then I went to India, and I was working at the school for incarnate lamas, teaching, you know, where they were learning English. And then I remember that I was working as secretary for the woman that was running this, Frida Bedi. And one evening, we got this letter with a piece of Tibetan paper, handmade paper. And the letter was saying, could we find a market for this handmade paper? And it was signed Kamta Rinpoche. And as I read the name, just faith naturally just arose. And then the next day I asked Frida, who is Kamta Rinpoche? And she said, oh, he's this very high Kagyu Lama. And I said, oh, so he's Kagyu, so I could take refuge with him. And she said, oh, yeah, he's very high Lama. Oh, he's the Lama we're expecting. Yes, yes, we engaged a room, and we're waiting for him to come. And so we waited for him to come. We waited all through May, and he didn't come. We waited all through June, and he didn't come. But I knew this was my Lama. I had no idea what he looked like, whether he was old or young or fat or thin or who he was, anything, but I just knew this was my Lama, he was coming. Then on the last day of June, which was my 21st birthday, then Frida got a call, and then she put the phone down and said, well, your best birthday present has just arrived down at the bus station. Kamta Rinpoche's here. So then I ran round to where I was living and put on a Tibetan chuba, you know, Tibetan dress, and a kata, you know, white scarf, and went back. And meantime, he had arrived, and he was sitting there with 2 other tulkus. And I remember sitting there and just seeing the bottom of his robe and his brown shoes. And I was just too overawed to actually look at him. I just sat there staring at his brown shoes. And I said to Frida, say, I want to take refuge with him. And she said, oh, yes, she would like to take refuge with you. And he said, of course. Like, well, what else could she want to do? So then, for the first time, when he said, of course, in English, then I looked at him. And when I looked at him, it was like, first, like seeing somebody you knew very well that you hadn't seen for a long time. Oh, how nice to see you again. And at the same time, like the deepest part of me, which had always been here, suddenly had manifested outwardly. So I never had any doubt. And he never had any doubt either, I assume, because Frida sent me to help him with his letters to be secretary, and then I went there. And within a week, I said, I want to be a nun. And he said, of course. And so, you know, 3 weeks after meeting him, I got ordained in his monastery. He took me back to his monastery. So up until now, our nunnery is under the incarnation, the Yangtze of that Lama, Kamta Rinpoche. So, I mean, you know, 60 years, this is him here. Can we look? So this is the incarnation. My Lama, the previous Kamtro, died when he was 49. And then he got reborn immediately. And so this is the new incarnation, the new 𝐿. My 𝐿 was the 8th, this is the 9th. And our nunnery is associated with my Lama's monastery of Kampaka. So we are still very connected, 60 years down the road. We are still part of that connection. And my devotion has always been to him. I met many, many very great lamas, including Degu Khyentse Rinpoche and Dujang Rinpoche, of course, the Karmapa, the previous Karmapa, ordained me, and the Dalai Lama, and whoever was around, you meet them all. And fantastic lamas, really wonderful, But that heart connection was my good fortune, really. It's like, falling in love with somebody and you marry them and then you're married to them for life and you could never think of being married to anybody else. It's sort of like that, that connection, which had obviously continued for many lifetimes, was reunited in this life, even though I was born in England and he was, in Tibet. But we had the karma to meet again in India. And I've been with his monastery and lay community. Now we have a nunnery in India. They asked me to start a nunnery, so we have a nunnery. And it's still connected with the 𝐿 lineage. So the point of devotion, and really why it's emphasized in the Tibetan tradition, is that it is a way, if the Lama is genuine, and nowadays this is always a problem, but if the teacher, not just the Lama, but any teacher, if it's a genuine teacher, then by having total devotion and surrender to that teacher, it like empties us out, our ego empties out, so that the blessings can come in. Trungpa Rinpoche said it was like a corridor with 2 doors on either end. And the teacher's door is always open, but whether or not our door is open or not depends on our level of devotion. And that level of trust and that openness is what is essential for gaining the mind blessings, to recognize the nature of the mind. Another example is that, like, if you think of all the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, they're like the sun shining in the sky, vast and infinite. But if we put a piece of paper on the ground, the most the sun will do is make it dry and crinkly. What we need is a magnifying glass between the rays of the sun and the paper. If you put a magnifying glass in, it will, contain all that, and then the paper will start to smoke and then burst into flames. So the Lama's blessings is like that. It encompasses all the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to come into our own mind stream. And so therefore, in the Tibetan tradition, the genuine devotion is considered to be the quick path, because then all the blessings of the Lama's mind go into our mind. That's the idea. But for that, you also have to have a teacher who is immaculate, and that has been the problem. Because in one way you're giving all the power there, so that they may give the power back to you. And so if they misuse that trust, then it's very serious.
What do you say then to the people who have not met their Lama, or who doesn't have that merit?
I would say just keep practicing. I would say don't wait around for the Lama to come and click his finger and you got it. In the meantime, there's a lot that we can do for ourselves. There is so much out there, especially nowadays. And, with the lockdown, it got every order teachers onto YouTube. And so there's enormous amount of teaching out there. And get a basic... if you want to study with a university professor, it helps if you can already read "The cat sat on the mat." You know, why waste his time? You can teach yourself that, right? So, I mean, it's so much that we can already do. We don't need, you know, the Buddha himself in front of us. We can do this for ourselves, and with the teachers that we are available, we can already, you know, really work on our mind so that if we did meet with a great teacher like that, we could get it. Otherwise, if our mind is the usual mad monkey mind, even if you met the Buddha himself, he couldn't help, right? So I think that the important thing is, in the meantime, to work on taming our mind, so that if we do meet with a genuine teacher, they can train us, right? Otherwise, while our minds are just mad, wild horses running all over the place, you can't train that. You know, first you have to tame the horse. And that we can do. I mean, only we can do that, really. And there's so much out there. And so find a path a practice which really speaks to us, that means something to us, and then practice it. And then, if the time comes that the karmic conditions come together, then they can teach you something really worth having. You know, that's the point. Otherwise, they have to start at the beginning, because we're not ready. So, I mean, you know, there's no excuse is the point. I mean, I have known people who refuse to do any kind of practice because they're waiting for the perfect guru to come and just snap their fingers and they get it, you know. But meantime, yeah, life is slipping by. And most of these practices, you know, it's not a thing esoteric. We just have to sit down and do it. And it's all out there, explained to us in books and in you know, online. And, you know, so no excuses.
Thank you, Jetsunma, for coming. And I'm very grateful that I could come and attend this session. I have felt that all along. Somehow I've been lucky in that I've been able to meet you, and you don't have very many public talks and so on, but still over the years I've had this opportunity. I think it's what I want to say. It's not really a question, I'm sorry, it's more like a comment. But I found your answer to this young man's question about the way he meditates, and then you went into that the beauty, the hidden beauty of our Buddha nature and the connectedness that we have. And I feel that when in Buddhist circles, of course we talk about suffering, we need to open our eyes and we need to know what suffering is, so that then we can also know what happiness is. But I feel like it's a bit off balance that we don't talk enough about that beauty of like what you've said, so it becomes dry. And I've been studying Buddhism for a long time, but I worry about young people who come into, or new people to Buddhism, and all they see is this dry and this very painful path and so on. And it cannot be attractive when you're suffering so much already, and then you need this so much dryness. Yeah.
Well, we should always remember that the Buddha said this is a path of joy. He said even if it was a path of suffering, it would still be worth it for the fruit. But it's not a path of suffering, it's a path of joy. And as we gradually begin to deal with our unruly minds, our monkey begins to calm down a bit, then joy arises. And it should be, I mean, I always say no matter samsara, okay, the nature of samsara is difficult, but the Buddhas are always smiling. You know, you look at all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, they're all smiling. Don't worry, it's okay, you know. So even to recognize that samsara is dukkha is a relief. Because then when dukkha comes, we can think, well, what do you expect? This is samsara. And that makes things much easier somehow, you know? That we don't have to pretend that things do not get difficult. But when they do get difficult, we have tools for dealing with difficult situations, difficult people, how to take all these problems and difficulties and transform them into the path, right? I mean, so there's a lot of teaching on how our biggest obstacles are our greatest opportunities, right? So then it turns everything around. And we don't have to be afraid anymore because we can everything depends on our own attitude and not on the external circumstances. So the Dhamma is very skillful also. And it is, as I say, you know, the Buddha himself said it is a path of joy. And you're right, you know, to always be talking about all the hell realms and the lower realms and the difficulties in samsara and not recognizing that that's because we are grasping in the wrong direction, right? The problem is not out there, the problem is with our own unruly minds. So the solution is also within ourselves. Then that is something very joyful. Isn't that wonderful? You know, and yeah, you know, actually Buddhism is the most optimistic religion in the world. Because it says, well, you know, actually you're fantastic. You don't know that yet, but actually, if you practice, you'll get glimpses of it, you know, and then gradually it will unfold. And we'll recognize things are not at all the way we see them to be with our ignorant mind. That actually everything is very, very different and good. So yes, I mean, yes, it's, you know, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, but the Four Noble Truths say life is difficult, life is dukkha. Why? Because of our mind, because of our grasping mind. But ultimately, is absolutely perfectly okay. There is a sensation. There is, you know, dukkha isn't the ultimate truth. Dukkha is how we see things with our deluded mind. Ultimately, everything's perfectly okay. And here's how to get to that understanding. So the Buddha is saying you're sick. This is the reason why you're sick. But good news, ultimately you're really healthy, and this is the remedy for you to become healthy again, because your true nature is completely okay. So, you know, we shouldn't get fixated on only the First Noble Truth. There are 4 truths, and all the others are dealing with how to overcome the situation, which we ourselves create. It's not out there. The Buddha didn't say it was out there. He said the reason for our dukkha is inside our own mind, our own attitude. That's the problem. Change your attitude, everything changes. Doesn't mean that outside, when you realize nirvana, it doesn't mean, you know, everything, suddenly you're in a pure land. But our whole way of dealing and seeing completely transforms. We still might have difficult neighbors and so forth, but they're no longer a difficulty. The difficulty lies in our heart and our attitude, not in the external situation. This external situation we can deal with. So yes, we should recognize that Buddhism is a path of joy, not a path of dukkha. How to overcome dukkha, right? That's what it's all about. So we leave it there, okay? I said I would do 1 hour, so I've done 1 hour. Lovely to see you all. Keep practicing. Just maintain a mindfulness. Mindfulness doesn't mean a closed mind, but an open awareness during the day, as much as possible to stay in the present as much as possible, but anyway, to be aware of what's happening, sounds, thoughts, sight, anything which occurs, just to know it. I mean, it's all just about not being swept away by our unconscious, but being in the present and knowing it, and keeping a good heart, recognizing that everyone we meet wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. So at least we can wish them that in our heart. You know, even if they're difficult or if they're not difficult, but just think, wouldn't it be nice if you were well and happy and free from suffering? That would be lovely. And so keep a good heart. I mean, if we can't be nicer people, then what are we doing? You know? And within relationships to, you know, the Buddha, be kind, be gentle, make peace. Exactly that. Exactly
Good
that.
eyesight.
Yes, that's it. You know, if we can't be kind, then what are we doing, right?
Thank you so much, Venerable. Let's say 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Some people...
Thank you all. Thank you for your questions. And sorry for my inadequate answers. But anyway, lovely to be with you all. Tomorrow we fly back to India. Our nuns are about to start their annual 2-month silent retreat. I mean, most of the nuns are in their 20s and 30s, and they all stay for 2 months. I mean, amazing. They actually do. And so they do this, you know, it's range retreat, and so they do a meditation retreat for 2 months. And so I also am going back for a few weeks to Lahul, which is the Himalayan valley where I stayed for 18 years. So I will go back there to one small nunnery there. The nun said, please come and do a retreat. It's a wonderful Buddhist Himalayan valley. The people there are Buddhist. And there are some monasteries there. Some of our nuns also come from that region. It's supposed to be, in Tibetan it's called 𝐻𝐿𝑒𝑤𝑠ℎ𝑖𝑝, which means Lahul, land of the Dakinis. And Dakinis are these female spiritual entities which help beings to remove obstacles and fulfill the path. So it has a very special, strong feminine atmosphere there. It's a very special place. So I'm very happy to go back there and do a month or so of retreat. So tomorrow, Mei Ling and I leave and we go back to India. And I will come back again in January. Yes, we're in January. So I hope I see some of you then. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.